Ontologies are used in order to enable the data that's being discussed in year one to be understood by the people who are in the sales department in year 14.
Welcome everyone to the TechGuide podcast, where we give actionable advice to those wanting to break into tech or are looking for their next gig. We have Barry Smith on the podcast today. He is a professor of biomedical informatics, computer science, and philosophy at the University of Buffalo on the podcast today. Super excited to have him come on here to talk about career opportunities in tech for non-STEM students on the show. So Barry, thank you so much for being here. Super excited to have you on.
Oh, thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
It's going to be a great episode. And before we dive into it too much here, let's talk about who Barry Smith is. Can you kind of lay the groundwork of your work at the University of Buffalo?
Good. Yeah. So I started life as a philosopher of a very normal sort. I studied the history of philosophy. But then I became interested in a specific branch of philosophy, which is called ontology. And I've worked in ontology for the last more than 40 years, actually. About 10 years in, I noticed that my work was being taken seriously by some groups in the computer science field. And so I began to explore the possibility of using the philosophical ideas that I was working on in areas where it would be useful to, for instance, computer scientists. And I worked with the very first generation of computer scientists who were exploring using ontology. Now, I should explain what an ontology is. Building a database, then you have column headers for your data. And those column headers you usually make up. But if you make up your own column headers, then when you have to combine your data with the data of your neighbor or your customer or your boss, they probably use different column headers, and so the data does not merge. And ontology is based on the idea that we can create certain constraints on column headers in databases so that they will merge, or at least have a better chance of merging. And I applied this idea in the beginning in biomedicine, biomedical informatics. This was in the time of the Human Genome Project, when biologists all over the world had huge amounts of data which they didn't really understand, but which they knew would be important for medicine. And so working with a group of people, biologists interested in IT at that time, I developed a collection of ontologies which were designed to make it easier to find and to use and to combine the data which was growing up all over the world. And this became the so-called open biomedical ontologies foundry. Now, leaping forward, some years later, the US Army discovered my work in ontology and decided that they wanted something similar for them. And since then, I've been working occasionally and now more systematically with various government bodies. So ontologies are becoming ever more important. So all my students, philosophy students, get jobs, very well-paying jobs. So the starting salary for my PhD student graduates is $175,000. That's with no job experience, but they know how to build ontology. And the ontology approach that we created in Buffalo is now an international standard. It's ISO 21838-2. It's a standard in the DoD. It's a standard in intelligence agencies. It's a standard in the Department of Homeland Security, or it's on the road to being a standard there. And in fact, just at the moment, we have a 10-day boot camp of DHS personnel here in Buffalo who are joining a new master's and PhD program in applied ontology that we have established on the backs of the philosophy department here.
I love it. It sounds like you've done a lot of cool stuff. I think I want to ask like how everyone, we will talk about career opportunities here, but I'm just curious, like getting started like when computer science was getting so big, like take us through like what it was like when you're first like applying this in like a computer science as I'm just like super curious on that.
So the interesting thing was when the Human Genome Project began to transform biology and biomedicine, there were two groups involved. One group were the what you might call the homely biologists, who were used to going out into the jungle and collecting notes about phenotypes of different organisms. And then on the other hand, there were the IT people who really liked to do computer programming. And for them, the most important thing is, does your program execute? And there was a kind of war between those two groups. I was lucky enough or unlucky enough to belong a little bit to both groups. But there was no, the biologists tried to build their own data tools, data software. Yeah. Gradually, they realized that they had to use the data software tools that were developed in computer science. And so now it's quite sophisticated and there isn't the same kind of gap. But when I joined, there was a gap. And I guess you could say that I did something to resolve the gap and to create more friendly relations. So my case is quite unusual. Now things are completely different. Now, if you want to be a bioinformatics person, then there are jobs for such people. They're university jobs primarily. They're not the kind of jobs that I am recommending as a place where non-STEM students might have a good career, partly because you have to be interested in biology or medicine in order to get into that field. And if you're lucky, you will find, you'll get into a program where they will enable you to learn computer science tools. And it's pretty well laid out. So once you get into a good department, you start using computers. There will always be many things for you to do. And there'll always be a need for people with real skills in computing who can help biologists and medical people. So the interesting side, I think, is in the DoD and related agencies.
I love it. Let's talk about like some of those like career opportunities for non-STEM students. So can you talk to us, like, what are some common roles or positions in the tech industry that non-STEM graduates can pursue, and what skills are essentials for these roles?
Good. So if you go to Google Jobs or Indeed or any of the other big job sites and you enter ontologist, then if you're in America, this doesn't work for other countries, then in America, you'll find on any given day maybe 20 openings. And there are always 2 openings for Amazon. So Amazon in 100 years will still be searching for 2 ontologists. We know one of the people who is already working in ontology in Amazon, and he conforms more or less to the kind of case which I think you're interested in here. You will also see jobs under the heading of semantic technologist. Now, semantic technologists are people who do ontology, but they do ontology only from the computational perspective. In other words, they know how to use ontology software. They know how to use ontology software in helping people to merge their databases or to transform their databases. But that's a job for people who are already in the tech arena. So semantic technologist means an ontologist who already knows how to program a computer and has some tech sophistication. But not all ontology jobs are going to require specialization in computing. You very likely will acquire along the way some knowledge of computing. But my students, some of them have computer skills that they acquire in their studies here, but many of them don't. They become ontologists and they start to do things like formulate definitions of terms. So the trick about ontology is that you don't just have column headers in a database. You have column headers in a database which are logically defined and so that makes them accessible to computers. They're also defined in English terms, in natural language, and that makes them accessible to human beings. that means human beings can build ontologies and they don't need a computer tool in order to build an ontology. There are computer tools. Mm-hmm. The most important one is called Protégé, and it's like a word processor for an ontologist. And when you build an ontology, you create a big taxonomy. So you might have thing at the very top, and then chair at the bottom, and then furniture, and so on up the way. And those kinds of ontologies are needed now by different kinds of government agencies. They've been needed for some time, but now they've recognized the need in a big way. And I think part of the reason is the ChatGPT revolution. Ontologies are being used along with knowledge graphs in order to try and constrain the error-prone sides of using large language models. And so the government needs people who can build ontology-focused knowledge graphs, which can then help IT use AI systems more reliably. And that's happening across the DoD, and they're scared across the IC, across the DHS. They're scared that they're going to miss out on possibilities because they don't know how to use AI in ways which are trustworthy. Yeah. And ontologies provide a key element in the solution because ontologies make knowledge graphs more reliable. They provide the cornerstones for knowledge graphs. So this is a move from database column headers to knowledge graphs, which are much more flexible. To build a good knowledge graph for instance, fentanyl smuggling. Yeah. You don't need computational tools. You need the ability to recognize what sorts of relations, what sorts of processes, what sorts of qualities are involved in fentanyl smuggling. And that means you need to talk to people who have relevant databases, but you also need to talk to targeteers who have experience in finding fentanyl in the tires of motor vehicles going across the Tucson border, and so on and so on. So that's where my students are now being employed. Even the ones without computational skills are being employed to create, test, use, develop, merge ontologies like that. And it's a never-ending problem because there are more knowledge graphs needed for more large language models, for more kinds of government operations. And so now you don't have to come to Buffalo and be a student of mine in order to do it, in order to become part of this career hierarchy. Buffalo is a good place to start, and we have new master's and PhD programs in applied ontology. And we have, it's online, which means you don't need to come to Buffalo. Most of the students so far are government professionals who see the need, and they see what the degree in applied ontology will give to their work and their status and so on. And so I believe it's going to be very successful.
I want to talk about what makes a successful ontologist. What are some of the common traits or technical skills that they have? That was two questions in one. What are the common traits they have, and then what are the technical skills?
Good. So pen and paper is a good start. I mentioned the tool Protégé. They don't need to start by using Protégé, but they will need to learn how to use Protégé within the first weeks of their ontology career, assuming they've got that far. You need to have question and answer skills. So you need to be able to talk to somebody working in a given discipline. It might be proteomics, or it might be fentanyl smuggling, finance. You need to be able to know who to phone, how to phone, what to ask them, and how to get the information you need to work out what fentanyl smuggling financing involves. And then you need to find out how those things you've identified are supported by other things. And then you could link this first thing, it involves money, I suppose. Yeah. And then the second thing would be a source of money. What are the sources of money? And then you list the kinds of sources of money and so on. Each new kind that you introduce into the ontology will lead to more questions which you need to ask. Now, linguists sometimes have the skills needed for this kind of activity. And there are some linguists within the ontology world I guess psychologists, anthropologists also might be able to get involved in this. Economic students interested in finance, for instance. So we have ontology people working in all of those areas one way or another. I would say the bulk of ontology people currently are still working in biology and medicine. But these other areas are growing quite rapidly. And the problem is that they're growing more quickly than we can supply trained ontology people.
Interesting.
And that's why it's such an attractive career option just at the moment.
Interesting. Can you talk about, I want to really hone in again, just to hammer this home for the audience. Like, what are those, you talked about Amazon, but like specific companies or sectors within the tech industry that are actively like looking for oncologists? Can you hammer that home just one more time for the audience as well?
So banks are looking for ontologists. So several of my students are working for Capital One in the HQ, and they are using ontology skills in order to do things like work out how you can combine information about given entities in the financial services industry, for instance, in such a way that you can draw conclusions. If you know that such and such holds of this financial service, then it may hold of all the other financial services which are of the same type. And so you explore, you see if you're correct. So financial services more generally, there is a big financial service industry ontology called FIBO, which is the Financial Industry Business Ontology. And well, Amazon we've already mentioned. So Amazon makes catalogs of things all the time, and they have they have human beings who are specialists in building those catalogs, and some of them are ontologists. I know that there is a furniture company, a very successful one in Europe, which runs its catalog program by using ontologies. So they have catalogs, they want to attract customers. They use ontologies in order to enable the customer to create their own shopping list visually so that they can see how different pieces of furniture would fit in different room constellations. So I can go on like this. The car industry used to have a strong ontology component. I don't know how it is at the moment, but there one idea was that you have, so it takes a long time to build a car. Some people say it takes 14 years because there's such a long period of working out the vehicle properties, working out the design, working out the legal aspects of doing X, making it go quicker or with less petrol and so on. It takes a long time. And the people who are talking about the car in year one are going to use a different language from the salespeople in year 14. And so ontologies are used in order to enable the data that's being discussed in year one to be understood by the people who are in the sales department in year 14.
Interesting.
So that kind of problem arises in pharmaceuticals also, because there you have a long life cycle between the initial identification of a potential drug target and the final drug actually being used with patients. And actually, drug design is one of the areas where ontology in the computer science sense is really making use of the new opportunities with AI.
What are like the job titles that are like being posted by like these banks or like Amazon? Is it like oncologists or like what are some of those job titles?
So ontologist is one, semantic technologist is another. If you play around with semantic technology, just enter semantics.
Okay.
And I can explain the reason why semantics is used. So there are tools. I mentioned one tool, which is Protege. People want to reason with ontologies. For instance, they want to test the consistency of an ontology.
Yeah.
And so there are other tools. Now, the way in which these tools are constructed is based on another part of philosophy, originally part of logic, which is called semantics, logical semantics. And so ontology and semantics are very closely related to each other. And so if you find job descriptions which contain the word semantics, then very often a job description will say something like informatics support or something. But then they say the kinds of informatics support that they need, and they might list semantic analysis or something like that. And that's a clue that an ontology position might be, or an ontology qualification might be useful.
Yeah. As we wind down this episode, I want to ask another question here. Like, what strategies or resources would you recommend these ontology students to like build a network and gain exposure? What are some of those resources or strategies you have?
Yes, so Buffalo plays a pretty central role in the ontology industry. So we're involved in organizing regular workshops. In fact, we have an open 1-hour workshop online every week. Anyone in the world can join. And then there are other organizations who organize workshops. So every year there is the so-called Formal Ontology and Information Systems conference, which is associated with several other conferences in the same place and at the same time. And if you go to those meetings, you will meet the people you need to meet, and you'll learn how things work. So that's an alternative avenue. The best avenue, of course, is to register for one of our programs in Buffalo. But the conference, the circuit in ontology is, I think it's a very useful opportunity for people to take advantage of.
I like it.
And it's not easy. You just enter ontology conference in Google.
Sounds simple enough.
Yeah.
And then just last question for you, Barry, as we wrap up this episode, just general advice you'd have for someone that is like wanting to get into this field or even study ontology. Like, what advice would you give to that person?
Well, all right. So I mentioned that the ontology approach we use in Buffalo is an international standard, ISO 21838-2. And that's the reason why it's taken so seriously now by the government, by the DoD and so forth. And along with two of my students, I wrote a book on this standard. So the standard is called BFO, Basic Formal Ontology. And the book was published by MIT Press. It's called Building Ontologies with Basic Formal Ontology. So it's the only book in the world with the word ontology twice in the title. And that I'd like to think that is a good introduction. Another good introduction, I have 200 YouTube videos, which people can, some of them are quite funny. And the most recent ones are about ChatGPT, which took 1 month of my life from me by making it such a target for finding stupid errors.
Yeah.
And so I've documented some of my troubles with ChatGPT on the YouTube channel.
I love it. And then lastly, if someone's like, oh my gosh, this is an awesome episode and I actually want to learn more about ontology, where can they go to connect with you and learn a little bit more about you?
So again, they find my email on Google. If they just say Barry Smith Ontology or just Barry Smith, they'll find my email quickly enough. And I can put them in touch either with me or with someone else who can help them.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Barry, for today's episode and coming on and talk about ontology. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.